The summer of 1887 arrived in Caldwell Creek the way it always did, without apology. It scorched the earth a deep amber, turned the creek to a lazy whisper, and baked the wooden storefronts along Main Street until they groaned in the midday heat. Dust devils spun lazily between the general store and the telegraph office, and the smell of leather, horse, and iron hung permanently in the air like a second sky. It was the kind of town that noticed everything and forgot nothing. And right now, all of Caldwell Creek was noticing Lisa Hargrove. She moved through the town's weekly market with the quiet grace of a woman who had learned, very early, that being watched was simply the cost of being herself. At 29, Lisa was striking in a way that had nothing to do with the fine cut of her dress or the dark auburn hair pinned elegantly beneath her hat. It was something behind her eyes, a steadiness, an intelligence, a faint shadow of sadness that made men want to rescue her and made women both admire and envy her in equal measure. 6 months had passed since Edmund Hargrove's death. Her husband had been a good man, older, formal, more fond of ledgers than laughter, but decent. He had left her the estate, the house, 1,200 acres of the finest grazing land in the county, and as she had recently and painfully discovered, a collection of debts he had never once mentioned. The vultures had arrived before the funeral flowers wilted. Mrs. Hargrove. Colonel Beaumont materialized at her elbow like smoke, silver-haired and immaculate in his Eastern suit, his smile the kind that arrived before his words and stayed long after they were needed. "You look radiant, as always. I do hope you'll consider joining me for supper this Friday. I have a proposal, a business matter, I believe you'd find most advantageous." Everything with Beaumont was advantageous. He was a railroad man from St. Louis who had come west when he smelled money in the soil, and he had been circling the Hargrove land for 2 years, long before Edmund was cold. The proposed rail line, his rail line, needed the eastern corridor of her property to connect Caldwell Creek to the main trunk line. He wanted the land. The supper, the smiles, the roses delivered to her door every Tuesday, all of it was real estate dressed in courtship. "You're very kind, Colonel," Lisa said, without slowing her pace. "I'll think on it." She wouldn't. Victor Crane found her near the dry goods store. He was a big man, broad across the chest, with a cattleman's permanent squint and hands that looked like they'd been carved from the same hardwood as his boots. He already owned more land than any 3 families in the county combined, and he wore that fact the way other men wore pocket watches, always visible, always polished. "Mrs. Hargrove." He tipped his hat low and slow. "My offer still stands. A merger of the Crane Holdings and the Hargrove estate would make us the most powerful partnership in West Texas." He said partnership the way he might say acquisition. "You'd never want for a single thing." "Good day, Mr. Crane," she said pleasantly. Preston Whitfield III she spotted from across the street and successfully avoided by stepping into the milliner's shop and waiting 4 full minutes until he passed. Preston was perhaps the least offensive of the 3, handsome enough, harmless enough, but he was a banker from Philadelphia who referred to Caldwell Creek as quaint, and had once asked, in full sincerity, whether the local people were accustomed to using silverware. He wanted her land as a Western investment portfolio. She was simply the deed that came attached to it. Lisa purchased her thread and flour and stepped back into the blazing afternoon, tired in a way that sleep never quite fixed. It was then that she heard it, a crack, a shout, and the explosive thunder of hooves on hard dirt. A blood-bay stallion had broken its tether outside the farrier's shop, sending its iron post flying like a javelin. The animal was enormous and wild-eyed, wheeling in blind panic through the crowded market lane. Women scattered. Men pressed flat against storefronts. A young boy no older than 7 stood frozen directly in the animal's path, too terrified to move, clutching a paper bag of penny candy against his chest. Beaumont stepped backward. Crane reached for a post. Preston Whitfield vanished entirely. And then there was a man. He came from nowhere and everywhere at once, moving not with urgency but with a strange, liquid calm that seemed to slow the chaos around him. He put himself between the stallion and the child without hesitation, without theater. He didn't shout. He didn't flail. He raised one open hand, angled his body sideways, and began speaking low, even, continuous, in a tone too quiet for the crowd to hear but clearly audible to the horse. The stallion screamed, reared, came down hard. The man held his ground, not retreating an inch, still talking, still calm. He reached up with patient certainty and caught the animal's halter on the second rear, and within 30 seconds, 30 extraordinary seconds, the horse was blowing hard through its nose, trembling but still. The boy ran to his mother. The crowd exhaled as one. The man stroked the stallion's neck twice, passed the lead to the slack-jawed farrier, and turned to go. That was when Lisa saw his face. He was not a handsome man in the polished way Beaumont was, nor physically imposing like Crane. He was lean and weathered, with a jaw set like a man accustomed to keeping his own counsel. His coat was patched at the right elbow. His boots had been resoled at least twice. His dark eyes swept the crowd once, not looking for applause, not looking for anything, and for just a half-breath they found hers. He looked away first, and walked on. "Who is that?" Lisa asked me, her housekeeper, who had appeared soundlessly at her side the way me always did. The older woman followed her gaze and made a small sound somewhere between a chuckle and a sigh. "That's William Calloway. Has that modest spread out on the western edge, Sundown Ranch. Good with animals. Quiet sort." Me paused, then added with the particular gentle firmness of a woman who had raised 3 children and suffered no fools, "Nothing to offer a woman like you, Miss Lisa." Lisa watched him disappear around the corner of the feed store, unhurried, alone. "No," she said quietly, adjusting her gloves. "I don't suppose he is." But she looked anyway. The first time Lisa rode past Sundown Ranch without stopping, she told herself it was simply the most direct route back from the eastern pasture inspection. The second time, she told herself the road was better maintained on that side of the creek. By the third time, in as many days, she stopped inventing reasons and simply rode. William Calloway was always working. That was the first thing she noticed. In a county full of men who employed others to labor while they surveyed their holdings from horseback, William worked his land with his own 2 hands, mending fences at dawn, hauling water, training horses in the round pen with that same unnerving patience she had witnessed in town. He never appeared to notice her passing. She suspected he noticed everything. On the 4th morning, her mare stumbled on a loose stone and came up slightly lame on the left foreleg. Lisa dismounted and was crouching helplessly in the road, examining the hoof with absolute uncertainty when a shadow fell across her. "May I?" William said. He was already kneeling before she answered, his hands moving across the mare's leg with calm authority. He found the bruised sole in less than a minute, produced a folded cloth from his back pocket, and bound it with clean, efficient care. "She'll be fine in 2 days," he said, standing. "Walk her back slow. No riding today." "Thank you," Lisa said, and then, because silence felt suddenly wasteful, "You're always working." He looked at her with those steady dark eyes. "Land doesn't rest." "Neither, it seems, do you." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but its suggestion. "Coffee's on if you want it, while the mare settles." She stayed 2 hours. They sat on the porch of his modest ranch house, plain as bread, clean as conscience, and talked about things Lisa hadn't discussed with anyone since Edmund died. Not finances, not social obligations, not land values. They talked about the particular silence of the plains before a storm, about whether a man could ever truly own land or merely borrow it for a generation, about loss, approached sideways and carefully, the way you approach a subject that still has edges. William spoke rarely but precisely, as if he had decided long ago that words were currency best spent wisely. When he listened completely, no glancing toward the horizon, no half-attention. It was, Lisa realized, the most uncommon thing she had encountered in a very long time. She began returning openly. Propriety be hanged. He taught her to read a horse's temperament through its ears and eyes before ever touching the reins. He showed her how her own mare had been trained with too much harshness, creating anxiety disguised as stubbornness. Under William's quiet instruction, the animal softened within a week. Lisa understood without either of them saying so that he was describing something larger than horsemanship. Me noticed the change immediately. "You're smiling at breakfast again," the older woman announced one morning, setting down a plate of biscuits with pointed emphasis. "The weather's improved," Lisa replied serenely. Me said nothing further, but she watched. The town, meanwhile, was growing louder. At the Caldwell Creek Founders' Day social, a compulsory event for anyone of standing, Victor Crane made his move with the subtlety of a man who had never needed subtlety. He stood before the assembled guests in the decorated hall, raised his glass, and announced to 60 people that he fully expected Mrs. Hargrove to make him the happiest cattle baron in West Texas before the summer's end. The room turned to Lisa in collective anticipation. She set down her lemonade with extraordinary composure. "Mr. Crane," she said, her voice carrying cleanly across the room, "I will be certain to notify you if my circumstances lead me in that direction." She smiled. "Do enjoy the dancing." The humiliation was Crane's entirely, but he was not a man who absorbed embarrassment gracefully. His jaw tightened in a way that suggested the evening was not concluded for him, not by a long measure. 3 days later, William was repairing the northern fence line when Crane arrived on horseback with 2 of his hired men behind him, a particular formation designed to communicate something without stating it directly. "Calloway." Crane didn't dismount. "You've been entertaining company above your station. I'd advise you to remember what you are and what you aren't." William drove a fence post into the earth with one clean strike of the mallet. Then he looked up. "Man who has to scare off competition," he said evenly, "doesn't deserve to win it." He picked up the next post. "You know your way back." Crane's horse shifted beneath him. He left without another word. William didn't mention the encounter to Lisa. She heard about it from the blacksmith's wife, who had heard it from Crane's own hand, who had apparently found the whole exchange deeply satisfying. It was Beaumont who worried her more. The colonel arrived at the Hargrove estate one Tuesday morning with her lawyer, Mr. Deeds, in tow, a combination that signaled legal architecture rather than social courtesy. He spread documents across her late husband's mahogany desk with the smooth efficiency of a man who had rehearsed the gesture. The railroad required the Eastern Corridor. The Hargrove debt, he knew its precise figure, which told her he had been investigating her finances, made her position precarious. The solution was elegant and obvious. A union of interests, legally and personally. He would retire her debts entirely. The railroad would proceed. Everyone would prosper. "I'll need your answer by month's end, Mrs. Hargrove," he said, buttoning his coat. "The board in St. Louis does not extend deadlines." After they left, Lisa sat alone in the study for a long time. That evening, a thunderstorm rolled in from the northwest with spectacular violence, turning the sky green-black and sending rain in horizontal sheets across the plain. Lisa had ridden out earlier than wisdom permitted, and when the storm broke she was barely within reach of Sundown Ranch. William opened the barn without a word and they sheltered inside while lightning split the sky beyond the doors. The horses shifted in their stalls. The rain hammered the roof like applause. They stood listening to it. "William," she said finally, "why won't you sell this land? Beaumont offered you more than it's worth by any measure." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Some things are worth more than their measure," he said. "That isn't an answer." "No," he agreed quietly, "it isn't." He turned to look at her directly then, and something moved behind his eyes, something deliberate and restrained, like a door held carefully shut. "There are things I need to tell you, Lisa, but not tonight." His voice was low and certain. "Some things need to be said at the right time." The storm raged on. Neither of them moved toward the door. And Lisa, who had spent 6 months being offered everything except honesty, found that she did not mind waiting. He came to her on a Tuesday. Not a social call, not a chance encounter on the road between their properties. William Calloway rode directly to the Hargrove estate at 7 in the evening, dismounted at the front gate, and knocked on the door like a man who had made a decision and intended to honor it completely. Me answered, looked at him, looked behind her toward the parlor, and wordlessly stepped aside. Lisa was sitting by the window with Beaumont's proposal documents spread across her lap, reading the same paragraph for the fourth time without absorbing a single word. She looked up when William entered, and something in his expression, a quiet urgency, a resolve she hadn't seen before, made her set the papers down immediately. "Come with me," he said. "There's something I need to show you." "Now." Now. She reached for her riding coat. They rode west in the long amber light of the dying evening, past the edge of Sundown Ranch's familiar pastures, past the round pen and the modest house, and the northern fence line he had been repairing the day Crane had come to threaten him. William led her beyond all of it, toward the rocky canyon wall that formed the westernmost boundary of his property, a place she had always assumed was simply the rough, unworkable end of his land. He dismounted at a narrow gap in the canyon face, concealed almost entirely by a growth of cedar and scrub oak that had been deliberately, she now realized, left untrimmed. He produced a key from inside his coat, unlocked an iron gate hidden within the brush, and held it open. "This way," he said quietly. Lisa stepped through. What lay beyond the gate stopped her breath entirely. The canyon opened into a valley, wide, secret, and impossibly lush against every expectation of the surrounding terrain. A natural spring fed a clear stream through its center, lined with cottonwood trees whose leaves caught the last of the evening light like scattered coins. The grass was thick and green, the soil dark and rich. And along the far canyon wall, unmistakable in the fading light, ran a broad seam of silver ore wide as a man's arm span, glittering coldly against the red rock face like a frozen river. Lisa stood very still. "I found it 2 years ago," William said, coming to stand beside her. "Digging a new well in the dry season when the creek ran low. The seam runs deep. A proper assay, which I had done privately in San Antonio, puts the value somewhere that would make Beaumont's railroad fortune look modest by comparison." She turned to look at him. "You've known for 2 years." "Yes." "And you told no one." "No one," he confirmed. "I watched what the railroad money did to this county. I watched what Crane's cattle empire did to the families that used to farm on land he swallowed whole. I watched what Edmund Hargrove's wealth did to," he paused, choosing his words with that characteristic care. "I watched what it did to the people around it." He looked at her steadily. "I didn't want that life. I still don't, necessarily. But I didn't want to lose the choice of what to do with it either. So I waited." "What were you waiting for?" she asked softly. "To be certain," he said, "that the person I told would understand why I kept it." The valley held them in its particular silence, just the creek and the cottonwoods and the first stars appearing above the canyon rim. "I'm not offering you silver, Lisa," William said then, and his voice was lower now, carrying the weight of something long considered. "I'm not offering you a solution to Beaumont's deadline or a strategy for your estate. I've watched 3 men offer you wealth as though you were a transaction to be completed, and I will not be the fourth." He paused. "I'm offering you the truth of who I am, all of it, because you deserve that from someone, and apparently no one else in this county has thought to provide it." Lisa looked at him for a long moment, this quiet, weathered, impossibly honest man standing in a secret valley full of silver he had never once used as a weapon or a lure. Every suitor had come to her table with wealth displayed like a hand of cards, expecting her to fold gratefully into their plans. William had been holding the strongest hand in the county for 2 years and had never once placed it on the table between them. "You foolish, wonderful man," she said, and her voice caught only slightly. "You could have solved everything months ago." "I could have," he agreed, "but then you'd have been choosing the silver, not me." She closed the distance between them in 3 steps, and for the first time since Edmund's funeral, Lisa Hargrove cried, not from grief or exhaustion or the accumulated weight of being perpetually managed and maneuvered, but from the profound, unlocking relief of being simply, completely known. The next morning arrived clear and bright, and Lisa Hargrove did not go to Beaumont's dinner. She went to town hall. The gathering was unplanned and therefore twice as effective, the way genuine things always are. Word traveled from the telegraph office to the saloon to the church steps in under 20 minutes, and by the time Lisa stood before the assembled citizens of Caldwell Creek, there was not a soul in the county who wasn't present or accounted for. She settled Edmund's debts publicly and in full, a private mining lease, legally and transparently filed that very morning by William Calloway with the county clerk, had provided precisely what was needed. The terms were conservative, purposeful, and irrevocably above board. Beaumont's strategy, which had depended entirely on secrecy and her financial desperation, collapsed like a poorly built fence in a strong wind. She declined Colonel Beaumont with grace. She declined Victor Crane with finality. She declined Preston Whitfield III with a politeness so complete it was devastating. Beaumont, unwilling to accept the architecture of his own defeat, stood in the middle of the hall and announced loudly that he would expose William Calloway's hidden claim as fraudulent, that Calloway had been concealing assets illegally, that the whole arrangement was corrupt. Lisa turned to face him with the particular stillness of a woman who has survived grief, pressure, loneliness, and a county full of men who underestimated her, and has come out the other side entirely unimpressed. "The claim," she said clearly, "was filed at 8 o'clock this morning. Legally. Transparently. The county clerk has the full assay documentation, the survey boundaries, and the mining lease agreement. Every figure is public record as of today." She tilted her head slightly. "Perhaps, Colonel, you'd like to explain to Sheriff Briggs why you had an unlicensed surveyor on that same canyon land 3 weeks ago." The color left Beaumont's face in a single, visible motion. Sheriff Briggs, who had indeed been looking into that particular matter quietly for some days, stepped forward from the back of the room with an expression of professional satisfaction. The wedding was held 6 weeks later in the Hidden Valley. It was small, the sheriff, the blacksmith and his wife, a handful of homesteader families William had quietly helped through lean winters past. The cottonwood trees were turning gold at the edges, the creek running clear, the canyon walls warm in the October light. Lisa wore no veil. She wanted to see everything clearly. The silver was mined carefully, modestly, with a portion set permanently aside for a schoolhouse on the edge of town and a medical clinic that Caldwell Creek had needed for 15 years. The Hargrove estate was restored and the debts buried forever. Sundown Ranch was expanded gradually, honestly, at a pace that matched the land's own rhythm. On the last evening of October, they rode together to the canyon rim and looked out over everything, the valley below, the ranch beyond, the town in the far distance catching the last of the setting sun like an ember holding its warmth. Lisa rested her hand over William's on the saddle horn. "You know," she said, "you could have simply told me sooner." "I know," he said, "stubborn man." "Careful man," he corrected gently. She laughed fully, freely, the sound lifting out over the canyon and across the wide amber plain of Caldwell Creek, disappearing into the kind of evening that the West, at its very finest, occasionally offered as proof that the whole difficult, beautiful enterprise was worth every mile. It was.